Let's see. I'm going to come down. We went through that last week. We talked about well, we always talk about the 7 years, beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, we're going to have a number of things that will be happening, and the martyred souls, and then we're going to have that in the middle, and then we're going to have at the end Armageddon, Jesus' second coming to earth. In the middle is the focus of chapter 13 that we're in, and the Antichrist is full-blown Antichrist, known as Antichrist in the sense of who he is, will be manifest at that time. And we talked about the different judgments that are coming, and I believe they're kind of parallel. But we see that we have the seals and the trumpets, and then at the end we have the bowls. The bowls, I believe, are at the very end. And even if you have a different idea of that, they're always the third series of judgments, so they are at the end. We talked about the fact that the devil is not perfect. He's a created being who fell, and he's got to work out his plan. Devil, what's that saying? Plan your work your plan. But fortunately or unfortunately for him, fortunately for us, his plans don't materialize just because he makes them, And we have the Antichrist who will be coming for 7 years. And that's the focus of the chapter 13. And we see that there's two aspects, the military, political Antichrist and the spiritual leader. The spiritual leader is going to be a very important part, and that is because he's going to be the leader of the one world religion at that time, in some sense. He may not be totally the leader initially, but by the middle, when he declares himself God, then he's in effect declaring his own religion. We could call it Satanism today. They may or may not call it that then. Well, it's just the religion, right? Worshiping Antichrist is the religion of the time for the last 3.5 years. I mentioned that I do not believe he's a Muslim, especially having grown up in South Florida and having many Jewish friends down there. That used to be the Mecca. All the Jewish people moved from New York to Miami Beach. So you're gonna have run into and have friends down there. There's still a lot of Jewish people down there, but it's totally changed its overall complexion since those days. So so that's something to consider. I only mention that because I call it Johnny come lately theories. It's interesting. All the 50 years I've been studying this, I never heard about the Antichrist being a Muslim until after 9/11. And all of a sudden, all these theories started popping up. So it was convenient, oh yeah, Muslims are the enemy. So he's got to be a Muslim. But for 1900 years of study, nobody ever theorized that until last at best 2 decades. So I don't believe that's accurate. It's convenient, but I don't believe it's accurate. We're going to go into the actual verses now, and the verses, of course, for chapter 13 begin with verse 1. If you're following with your Bible, or not, just look at the screen. And it starts out talking about the first beast. So, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. The sea is a term used in biblical prophecy, which means the Gentile nations. So in prophecy, there's two terms that are generally used. That's because all prophecy is centered around Israel and the Jewish people. Not necessarily a particular Jewish person, but the nation and the promises to the nation of Jewish people. So the sea is always the Gentile nations. And the land, if it just says the land, it's talking about Israel. Of course, many times in the Old Testament, it says land of Israel, So that's where that comes from. So it's different than the way we would describe it. It's a prophetic terminology based upon the way God sees things, not the way we see them. With 10 horns and 7 heads. I mean, if you just read that and you didn't understand the background, you're going to think this is very strange. What kind of creature is this? It sounds like a chimera. which is a biological term for, was actually ultimately, it was ultimately a spiritual term in the olden days, which just means a creature of many, put together from many animals, if you will. So, you know, if it had the head of a lion and wings and feet of an ox or whatever, that's a chimera. But this thing was with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems, which are royal crowns on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. Sounds like a chimera, a strange beast, if you will. The 7 heads that I've gone over represent the world empires. So it's important because the sea, the Gentile powers, the Gentile nations, the whole world pretty much, of course, is Gentile, is something that's evolved over thousands of years. In other words, we don't have the sight, the hindsight, and necessarily the full study to understand what was here before. But you got to understand, God, of course, knows. Jesus and the Holy Spirit, they're all God, the 3 in 1. No. But most importantly, Satan and the demons and the fallen angels know, and the regular angels. I guess we can call them regular angels, the good angels. In other words, all the spiritual entities, they know the history. So, you know, it's not a matter of, oh, they've never heard of the Egyptian Empire or the Syrian Empire, but they were there. In fact, they were the ones being worshipped, if you're talking about fallen angels and demons, because every one of these, actually, they worshiped chimera. They had one particular one, which is interesting. It had a bird's head and you know, more of a human body. And that was one of the gods that they worshiped. They had many gods. All of these empires in the past, all 6 past empires, all had many, many gods. And that's what Paul was talking about. Remember when he went to Athens in the book of Acts, and he talked about the unknown God. So they had rows and rows of gods coming into the city. On each side were all these statues of gods, right? And then he said to them, I see you're very religious. You got lots of gods here. I wanted to, and they had, I guess they're covering their bases, right? Isn't this like people? They had one called the statue to the unknown God. Just in case we missed one, we didn't want to offend him and get smitten. Okay. So we're going to make a statue to some God we haven't even heard yet. And so Paul says, oh, I'm going to talk to you about the unknown God. And so but that's just representative of all these empires. They all had many gods, and not to belabor too much, but the predominant concepts go all the way back to Nimrod and his empire, which you can read about in Genesis. But it says Nimrod was a mighty hunter of men. Doesn't mean that he was out with a bow and arrow. What's that movie where they're hunting each other? Hunger Games. Wasn't like that, okay? What that means is that he was out to rule over men and control them. And he made the first empire. It was really kind of limited just to around the eastern end of the Tigris-Euphrates River. But so he formed his little empire there. It really wasn't an empire in the sense of these that we're mentioning, but it was the first kind of burgeoning empire where he was trying to make an empire. All that's to say that the key elements of that were that he created a system of gods to worship based upon a particular concept, which then goes all the way through all these empires to today. There's the Father God, the Mother God, and the Baby God. And that God has gone all the way through. He had his wife, Semiramis. I've heard different pronunciations. I say Semiramis. But it was Nimrod, Semiramis, and his son. So and then by the time he gets to Egypt, it's Osiris and what was the other one? Horus, and I'm missing the third one. But anyway, if you study Egyptian mythology, you'll see, and that goes all the way down. Every one of these cultures, although they expanded to many, many gods, always had a central father, a mother, and a child god. So it's usually called the mother and child cult. It's like thousands of years old. So by the time it goes through all of these empires, and we're going to see in the next sentence that Daniel Daniel's referenced here, if you understand the symbology. In verse 2, it says, "And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear, its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave," oh, I got to move my little doily here. Oh, too big. Someday I'm going to get the hang of these computers. I really am. Okay. Oh my goodness. What are you guys going to do? Can't get good help anymore, can you? Let's see if I can shrink it down or we're not going to see anything. There we go. Anyway, so so you have to understand that in the 7 empires, 2 of them had already come and gone. I'm still talking about these gods being passed down. So by the time Daniel comes along, he was taken to Babylon in the Babylonian captivity of 586 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. And so he and his friends, young men, were taken there. And when he saw the visions of the creatures he's going to see and record are the ones that are current and going on. In other words, he's not interested in talking about Egypt or the second one, which was Assyria. Egypt is the one, of course, the children of Israel are in bondage in. And the Assyrians, when the Israelites finally got into the land and split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and you had northern kingdom of Israel, the Assyrians, the second kingdom empire, is the one that took them into captivity. That's where the 10 so-called lost tribes went. Lost because they never came back to the land in an organized and systematic manner. It's not like the 10 tribes went, now the 10 tribes are coming back. It's not like that. Unlike the southern kingdom. And so at the time of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar went to take the kingdom of Judah, then he took the 2 tribes to Babylon. And later on, it's clearly documented, those 2 tribes went back. And so they went back, and there was mainly the tribe of Benjamin and Judah. And of the 2, Judah was the kingly tribe, the messianic tribe. And so it came to be known as Judah. I guess it could have been called Benjamin, right? But the southern kingdom was known as Judah. So, but it's actually Israel in the sense of it was the intact Jews of the time coming back into the land and rebuilt the temple a second time. All that's to say that these creatures that John is reporting on were all mentioned earlier in the Old Testament, in particular in Daniel's prophecy. So John here, when he's writing in reference to describing this strange beast, goes back and tells you what it is. It's like, people say, I just wish I could understand this symbology. Well, he's telling you what it is. You have to do a little study, but he's telling us what it is. He's telling us that the leopard, the bear, and the lion all were parts of this beast. They're 3 heads of the potential 7 heads of the history. And all that's to say that the gods of Egypt became the gods of Assyria. And now he's talking about the leopard, which is Alexander the Great, who's going to come next. He's in Babylon. They have their own gods. They've absorbed the gods. And then he's prophetically predicting that there will be a leopard kingdom coming, a leopard empire. And that is understood clearly to be Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was probably the greatest general in history. But the main thing he did differently than anyone else, actually, I guess Hitler copied it a little bit with Blitzkrieg. But the thing is, he invented lightning war. In other words, where the other guys, they'd kind of like, take their time, get set up and have a battle. He just took all his forces and went like a leopard at lightning speed and took over every place he went. He conquered the entire known world, which was the Mediterranean world. So after that, it was predicted that a bear would come. And the bear was the symbol of the Medes and Persians, and that was the next empire. Medes and Persians, that kingdom, we probably know best from Esther. Esther was in the Persian kingdom, but there was another group called the Medes. They kind of intermingled and became the Media-Persian kingdom. But that's the next kingdom, and they're the ones that conquered Babylon, where Daniel was when he wrote the prophecies. And then finally, we have the lion's mouth. And the lion's mouth is the one that conquered the Medes and the Persian kingdom. And the lion, from Daniel's vision here in Daniel 7, the lion it represents the Roman Empire. So it was it was all powerful and all ruling. So there's a number of allusions here, but just to let you know, each of these 7 heads have meaning and they're knowable. Okay, so they're the kingdoms that have happened over the last 4,000 years. You go back to Abraham. So these kingdoms represent the history of the world in a nutshell. Okay. I think there was a movie called History of the World. It was a comedy or something. But anyway, the idea is that God is in control of history. God's aware of history, and all of history follows a particular pattern. It's going to culminate in a final kingdom. And that's what prophecy is all about. It's all about how promises to the Jews God will keep and manifest in his own kingdom. And his own kingdom is coming after these. So it's important to understand that the dragon gave authority and power to this beast system. And when I say beast system, the beast is actually multifaceted. The beast is a system. It's a world empire that's coming. It's also a personage, a person. And it's also an overall system of economic, military, and religious system. In other words, it's all encompassing. So it's going to be a worldwide total control by Satan, which is often referred to in the Revelation as just the beast. So you have to kind of discern by the context around the word what it means. This is very important because Daniel, when he prophesies, talks about these heads, and out of the final one is going to come a little horn. There's 10 horns, and the 10 horns, as I've talked about before, are going to be that horns in the Old Testament means powers, dominion kind of powers, ruling powers. And Daniel says there's a little horn which is going to come out of the 10. And it's often called in prophecy the little horn of Daniel. And the little horn is the Antichrist himself. So toward the end here, in the last 7 years, you're going to have the world ruled by 10 spheres of power. Those are the 10 horns. And it's going to be a worldwide kingdom. I say that to contrast because all these others, if you look at history, and I took a bunch of images. I was going to show you all the images, and I decided it may be overkill. But you can go down through each of these kingdoms. They're all in the Mediterranean, right? They're all surrounding the Mediterranean. So as Europeans and people from this hemisphere, we always whether they were in North Africa or Israel, called the Levant area, or whether they are in Europe itself, they always considered that to be their world. So whoever ruled that's the world kingdom. Of course, it wasn't really, in a sense that China was parallel and had been going on for many, many years. Of course, you got to understand the Europeans and Africans, most of these people in the Middle East didn't know anything about China, at least from what I understand and know. And that's why we hear about Marco Polo. I'm sure there were explorers that must have gone over to China and come back. But as far as there being, real trade and a real relationship, it didn't happen until some guy called Marco Polo. And so that's the story when you're in the pool and somebody says Marco and somebody else says Polo. That's where it comes from. So this little Italian guy traveled over to China, established relationships and a trade. It was a big deal. So, but that's where China really started to come into the sphere of understanding about these empires. But what happened is that the empires finally came to an end from the prophetic standpoint in the 6th one, the Roman Empire. So what time period in history did the Roman Empire disappear? It disappeared about 500. It's hard to put an exact date on it. But much like many empires, it was conquered from within. In other words, the only reason it fell is many enemies came against them, but they didn't conquer them. It fell because of the lack of moral fiber and the rot from within the empire. They became so weak and so, what should we say, non-Roman. They weren't like the Romans of the old days, that that various groups came and took them over. So by the Middle Ages, after 500, you do have a continued empire in the Holy Roman Empire ruling Europe. So, but the whole idea there was that that's not mentioned. So why do we have a gap from the Roman Empire around 500 AD, what, 1500 years ago, until the final Seventh Empire? Because God was not interested in those empires and ruling authorities, because they didn't affect Israel. Everything about prophecy is about Israel. Every single one of these powers I mentioned, Egypt, they were in captivity. Assyria took the northern kingdom captive. Babylon took the southern kingdom captive. Media Persians, they allowed the Jews to go back and build a city in the temple. The Greeks, remember, they came, Alexander the Great. And oh, by the way, it's an interesting story. It's rumored, well, it's in history, that Alexander the Great came to destroy the city and the temple, and they told him about the prophecy of Daniel, and he spared them because the prophecy was clearly pointing to him. So he considered them to be holy, and he spared the city. Actually, that's happened several times. But so anyway, so and then we have the Romans. We all know that anytime you watch a Jesus movie, you're going to see the Romans, right? The red headdress and the scarlet robes, all that stuff. So I guess if there's any empire that we're familiar with, it's probably the Roman Empire from the movies. So those are clearly known. And then we have this big gap prophetically, but it's going to be filled very soon by the seventh and final. Sometimes it's called the revived Roman Empire. And I mean, I believe that is correct in the sense that it's going to have many of the characteristics of the Roman Empire, but it's not correct in the sense that it's just in that little Mediterranean area. It's clear from the prophecy that the last empire, the empire of Antichrist, is the entire world. He's ruling the world. The prophecy clearly says he rules the world. He doesn't rule just a little Mediterranean pond like the rest of them. So that who knows what's going to happen with China and the rest of them, but all we know is the whole world, and no matter how powerful they look now, they're all going to be controlled by him eventually. But here's the very important part, I think, and I'm going to share my theory about this. You don't have to believe my theory, but it makes sense to me. One of its heads was slain to death. Okay. And this, of course, I believe, is talking about a person. You can't necessarily slay an empire. You could twist it that way, but I don't believe that's what it's talking about, especially in the context. One of its heads has slain to death, but its mortal wound was healed. Well, so a mortal wound, only a mortal can have a mortal wound, right? And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So commentators and people that are studied in the scripture and prophecy generally believe this is talking about a wound that will happen to the person Antichrist. Okay. And that also dovetails with my theory. I mean, not just mine, others have postulated it, but it goes back to what I've taught before in Isaiah 14:14. Satan can't create anything. He imitates, he mimics. I will mimic the Most High. So I believe he's going to mimic Jesus in every way. So, and I think the scripture bears that out. For the first 3.5 years, Jesus presented himself as Messiah and taught. And most of Israel, I think most of them, besides the leadership, obviously, but I think the average Joe out in the street liked Jesus and believed in Jesus. What's not to like? He feeds you and he heals you, What is not to like? So, but the leadership didn't like him. So they were out to get him. He was a threat to them. But the thing is that if what I'm saying is correct, I think it is, the first 3.5 years, Jesus taught, then he was killed. He suffered a mortal wound and he came back to life. And the idea was, that even those at the time thought that he was coming back very soon to set up the millennial kingdom. They didn't realize there was a, you know, a time gap there. We call it the church age. But in this case, if Satan is going to mimic the coming of Christ, anti means against, antichrist means against Christ or false Christ. So if he's going to mimic, I would expect personally, I can't say this dogmatic, that antichrist will come on the scene at 30 years old. Well, why do you believe that? Well, what was Jesus's age when he started? 30. You know why it was 30? Because you couldn't be a rabbi until you're 30. You had to be 30 years of age in the Jewish culture to be a teacher. So it wasn't just some pick out of a hat some age. It was that he was being obedient to Judaism. He observed all the real, not the man-made laws. He observed the Torah. So he was 30. So Antichrist will be about 30. I believe that. You don't have to. And so Antichrist, how long? Guess what? I'll let you guess. How long do you think Antichrist's teaching and whatever his ministry, if you will, his evil ministry? How long do you think that ministry is going to last? 3.5 years. Amazing. So the book of Revelation is divided into 3.5 and 3.5. First half of tribulation, second half, called Great Tribulation. So how long is he going to teach and preach, if you will, his evil message? 3.5 years. So what's going to happen after 3.5 years? What happened to Christ? They killed him. So what do you think is going to happen to Antichrist? So mortal wound was healed and the whole earth marveled. Okay, so Satan can only mimic, he can't create. I believe it's telling us, if you understand, if you dig into it and think about it, that it's telling us the Antichrist is going to be coming back from the grave after suffering a mortal wound. And they worship the dragon. Well, why would they worship the dragon? Antichrist is not the dragon, right? Antichrist is his own man, his own personage. And the dragon is clearly, from all the references in the Old and New Testament, Satan. That's one of his names, right? So why would they worship the beast? And they're calling this Antichrist man. They're calling him the beast. Why are they calling them the beast, and why are they worshiping the dragon? Because even the average Joe at that time, they're all unbelievers. I call them earth dwellers. The Bible calls them dwellers upon the earth. Today we probably just say earth dwellers. Why are they going to worship this guy? Well, first of all, he's going to be on GNN network being killed, and GNN network coming back. So literally the whole world's going to see him rise from the dead. Somebody doesn't like what I'm talking about. I'm preaching it anyway, buddy. Yeah. Okay, so what's going to happen, I believe, is he's going to come back from the dead. But we got one big problem there, and that's Satan has no ability to create life. You can look in the scripture. If anybody knows different, let me know. To me, the definitive part is from Jesus himself, John 10:10. The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And Jesus said about himself, I have come to give life. Jesus and God, they're all the same. Life, the devil, death. You know, I mean, I think you could probably teach a pre-K class that, and they would get that concept. Good, good God, bad, bad devil. So, how's this going to happen? And they say, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? I believe when they're talking about the beast, they're talking about the person who resurrects. And I have my own theory, which I'll tell you about that. But let me see if I can first get to our next slide. I don't expect you to know the Greek. I studied the Greek in seminary, but I like to make the case of the words because they're important. And in this 13:3, it pretty much, well, it doesn't pretty much, it definitely tells us that he's dead. Dead as a doornail, dead, you know. There's a postulation that the enemies of Christ came up with, and they called it the swoon theory. Geez, yeah, he was nailed to the cross. He kind of got weak. Of course, that shows how ignorant they are of what a crucifixion is. Well, they put him in the tomb. He just swooned, and all of a sudden he got better and walked out. Well, first of all, he was dead as a doornail. That's why they put a sword into his side, because water and blood congealed came out. That was a sign that he was dead. You know, he didn't swoon. He wasn't weak. He was dead, dead, dead. And the Romans were very good at making people dead. And so they were going to break his legs. Why? Because then he would suffocate within minutes. And they didn't. They said, he's already dead. I'm not going to break his legs, which is, by the way, a fulfillment of the Passover. The Passover lamb, no bones could be broken. But at any rate, so he's our Passover. But he didn't swoon. And when he went into the tomb, they rolled a stone. Would have taken several, if not many, men to roll back that stone. It's not he swooned, he got up. I mean, he was a carpenter, he was a strong guy, but he didn't roll away that stone. I got news for you. So when you hear all these theories, the Antichrist theories they come up with, none of them make any sense if you're a thinking person. But that's another matter. I digress. Any rate, so one of his heads of him was as slain to death. I'm doing a literal. So kai mian ekton kephalon atu os es fragmine es thanaton. Thanaton, by the way, is the word for death. Death. And maybe you remember, Michael, there's a superhero thing that was out recently, and the main enemy is called Thanos. You remember that? Thanos. That's the enemy. What was it? Avengers, I think. Yeah, Avengers. Anyway, so, I'm sure all the kids go, Thanos, oh, the writer made up some name. No, Thanos means the one of death. It comes from this word, Thanaton, Thanos. Anyway, so, and death and the plague of a wound. In the Greek, the word plague, we get our word plague. And so, yeah, plagues throughout history, especially in the Middle Ages, meant death. If you had a plague, people died, right? Pretty much you're going to be dead, like the Black Plague. So, but it was a synonymous word, that plague and wound or death. In other words, things that killed you were a plague. So it was plague. And he was wounded to death. So that final word there, therapeuthē, it means death. And then it says, and marveled all the earth after the beast. Now this beast, the word beast there is therion, but in Greek, it just means any beast. I mean, if I go to Animal Kingdom at Disney today, I'll be looking at various therions. They're just all beasts, right? What's the difference between a beast and a person? Any ideas? What's the difference between a beast and a person? Yeah. Soul and spirit, whatever. We are infinite. Beasts are finite. They don't have a soul and a spirit like we did. God didn't breathe in the spirit of God into them, or a spirit. Every person has a human spirit. They're not born again, but every person has his own individual human spirit. If you're not born again, you're cut off from the Holy Spirit. So you're like the Dead Sea. You're stagnant. You have no water flowing into you. You're spiritually dead. When you get born again, that blockage is out, and the good water coming from the Sea of Galilee flows into it. And I think it's Isaiah, or is it Ezekiel? Anyway, talks about the fact that in millennium, all that water is going to flow in and replenish the Dead Sea. It's going to be fresh water. But at any rate, so the whole point here is that they're calling in the Greek, this personage who is slain and rises again, the beast. And my own personal theory here is that the beast is going to be a clone. Nobody could have thought about that 10, 20 years ago even. And you say, oh, well, that's not a real thing. Well, the UN passed a resolution, I think it was early 2000s, against human cloning. And there's clones all over the place. If you have enough money and your dog dies, you can go get a clone of your dog. You'll get the same dog back. Today, right now, go on the net and find it. Of course, you're going to pay a lot of money, but you can have your dog back. It's going to look like your dog. Everything about it's going to seem like your dog, but it's not your dog. Okay, but that's okay for a beast because it doesn't need a soul. I mean, not in the sense of a human soul. So that's why I believe the most realistic explanation, something they couldn't even conjecture about, years ago. Even when I first started prophecy, nobody would have thought about a clone because it didn't exist. It's really new technology, and they're making animal clones. But nobody probably at this time has ever made a human clone, and probably only the people in the inner circle will know it's a clone. because the world marvels after it. So why do I think it's a clone? Because Satan can't rise. He can't make anything alive. The word is clear, as I just showed you from the Greek, that this guy's dead. But he also comes back from the dead. Now you got a problem. How is Satan going to bring back somebody from the dead? A guy that when the people look at him, when he comes back, are going to say, it's him, he's back. Means he's got to look like him, he's got to talk like him, in every way he's got to be him. Well, we also know in chapter 12, it says in the middle of it tells you the time period. At the same time that happens, Satan is thrown out of heaven to earth. Satan has always wanted to be worshipped. And we know that he can, in some sense, enter into a personage because he did into Judas. I don't know if he's going to possess this clone. I don't know how. I don't know the mechanics. I don't know that we can. It's a spiritual thing. In some way, I believe Satan is going to inhabit this clone, and he's going to in every way mimic the clone. In other words, that person, Antichrist, in one day will change into a different personality. Well, if that happens today in general, if I'm talking to Joe Smith today, I know Joe, and then I come back tomorrow, and Joe Smith, his face is all contorted, and he's saying blasphemous things out of his mouth, and his head's spinning around. What would we call that if you saw the movie? That's possession. Okay. Well, what if, and that would just be a demon, not Satan. That's one of the foot soldiers. That's a low-level guy. That's a Goomba down here. That's taking that guy over. What if Satan, the king of all demons, the king of all fallen angels, the highest ruler of evil, takes over a being? I believe that at that point, that's when he becomes the Antichrist. In other words, people say the Antichrist, they're generally not talking about the first 3.5 years when the guy's just a great political and maybe military leader or religious leader. He's just a guy. He's a really smart guy, but people don't think he's some kind of weird alien or something. But when this guy goes into the temple, and he's slain, he rises back up, he says, I'm God. Well, then Satan will finally achieve what he's wanted since he had Christ in the desert. Bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. So he's wanted to be worshiped. Why? Because he wants to be like God. From the beginning, he was the highest angel around the throne, and his sin, his fall was because I want to be God. Not you, I want to be God. Hey, I can do this. Used to be a commercial like that. You go in and guy wanted to do something. The guy goes, yeah, I can do that. It was a joke because obviously the guy couldn't do that, but he would tell him that. So I think I've been to a few of those guys. But at any rate, not Dan. Dan's going to tell you straight there. But hey, Dan, I want to put a salt thing in my pool. I can do that. Well, Dan actually can, but so at any rate, so if, that's my theory. You don't have to receive it. I think it fits all the pieces and it fits the modern technology and what's really going on right now. But it would explain a lot of things, especially given that Satan can't do, he's very limited what he can do. So if that's the case, then let's keep reading, see if it fits. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. Well, that's the last part of the tribulation. The Revelation calls it the Great Tribulation. Thalipsis Megas, the Great Tribulation. And so that last 3.5 years in character is totally different than the first 3.5 years. It's all wrath in the sense that it starts out with 2 billion people being killed. You say, oh, where do you get that from? Well, it says right in chapter 6 that 1/4 of the world's population is going to die. How many people? I just Googled it, 8 billion in the world today. 1/4 of 8 billion, 2 billion. So right off the bat, in the first thing of the tribulation, 2 billion people are wiped out. So I call that wrath. You can call it whatever you want to. People say, oh, no, we're going when the wrath comes. Well, that's wrath, baby. Who knows? We've never seen anything. World War II, it was nothing. It was a picnic compared to what this is going to be when it comes. Not to freak anybody out, but we're going to be out of here. Born again Christians are going to be out of here. So just that's the blessed hope. Titus 2, in chapter 2, it says, I think it's 2:13, the blessed hope. That's why the early Christians said blessed hope, because it was always hoped for that they would be fortunate to experience that, which I believe we will be. The church is told to resist the devil. So you see that the devil is opening his blasphemous mouth, and he's blaspheming God and all the heavenly dignitaries. In verse 7, and it was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them, and the authority was given it over every tribe, people, language, and nation worldwide. As I mentioned earlier, that's why this isn't a Mediterranean kingdom. It clearly says it's the whole world is going to be ruled by this beast. Why would it be called a beast, by the way? Because a human clone, according to what I understand spiritually and technologically, would be an exact replica genetically of the person it was cloned from, but it would have no soul or spirit. So again, what was the definition of, a giraffe or an elephant or whatever? A beast. What is the definition of a beast? It has no human soul and spirit. So that's why I believe it's called the beast. So, people often wondered about that, usually because they see this strange image, the horns and the heads. Oh, that's why it's called a beast. I don't believe that's why it's called a beast at all. But it is a beast in a sense. The kingdoms are the beast, the religion is the beast, but most importantly, a particular personage is the beast. And all that dwell on the earth will worship it. The beast is not a he or she, it's an it. Why? Because the clone image, remember, in Jesus, we have the hypostatic union, fully man and fully God. The beast is going to be fully Satan and fully clone. You catching that? Okay. It's an it. Satan is not an it, but the clone is an it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb. So everyone who's written in the book of life is not going to take the mark. And it gives us an admonition here. If anyone has an ear, this is found a lot. Let him hear. It's interesting that there's a difference between hearing and listening. So, he wants us to listen here. If anyone is taken captive, to captivity goes. This is talking about when the Antichrist declares himself God, because what's going to happen? Take the mark or die. So those who are captive, it's up, it's over. If anyone is slain by the sword, it says sword. That doesn't necessarily, and I don't think, mean the exact method. It could be a sword. It's people that think it's Muslims because of the sword. I personally think it's going to be some sort of technological situation that they're going to have mass beheadings, but that's me, gruesome. But here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints, but the one who endures to the end shall be saved. People take this verse out of context. What is the context here? What is this whole thing I've been reading talking about? Talking about the last 3.5 years of tribulation, the Satan inhabiting clone and saying, I'm God, I'm Antichrist, and going out to make sure everybody, and they'll have a tremendous surveillance system, make sure everybody takes the mark or they die or they run off into the desert someplace. That's the bottom line. So who is going to be saved? Sozo, which means physical salvation. That's what spirit, soul, and body, complete package. Who is going to be saved? If you understand this, who is going to be saved and endure unto the end of the 3.5 years? Why would it be said that way? Why in this context? Because, as it says above, the people that are captured, once you're captured, you're dead. Once your head's chopped off, you're dead. But there are going to be people who are going to flee away for the 3.5 years and hide themselves somewhere in the desert, probably in the mountains. And those people that manage to make it through to the end of the 3.5 years, when Jesus comes back, they will be completely saved and they will go into the millennium and populate the millennium. That's what this means. It has nothing to do with us in the church and whether we remain faithful. We will. I mean, we should and we will. But I'm saying in the context, always you have to have the context. Context clearly shows that this is talking about the last 3.5 years. It's the only thing this is talking about. So next time I'm going to continue on and we'll go through the final verses of chapter 13. And we'll go ahead and wrap it up now since I'm slightly over. Honey, would you